Welcome to a new episode of Eye on Academia, a podcast presented by the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. The Martin Center is dedicated to the reporting and analysis of higher education events, policies, and trends. I'm Jay Shallon, the host for today and a senior fellow with the Martin Center. Higher education's influence on the intellectual life of the nation is hard to overestimate. It is where new ideas are conceived, incubated, and spread to the general population. If you don't like the direction the nation is moving in any aspect, political, cultural, educational, and so on, chances are you have academia to thank, at least in part. Therefore, our colleges and universities need eyes on them, so they cannot operate in secrecy and use their influence to promote undesirable ends. We hope this program serves just that purpose. And there's been a lot going on in the last few weeks. Jenna Robinson, the Martin Center's president, will start with discussing North Carolina's attempts to push back against the woke revolution. This includes actions taken by the University of North Carolina System's Board of Governors and the state legislature to put a stop to diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates. Then Graham Hillard, our editor, will turn the discussion toward a truly disturbing turn of events, the introduction of the radical mindset, including critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion into our military academies. And finally, writer Shannon Watkins will talk about the Martin Center's new policy brief outlining our agenda to improve transparency in university governance. Jenna, you want to start it off?
Right. So we've talked before about the fact that the UNC Systems Board of Governors adopted a system-wide policy back in February to end compelled speech across all 16 institutions. That policy has gone into effect. It's now being implemented. And of course, that policy applies to the use of mandatory DEI statements or required DEI statements in hiring and retention, tenure and post-tenure review, and all of those steps towards hiring and retaining faculty. Well, in May, a group of faculty members at NC State University sent out a survey saying, implying that they were going to, in fact, use DEI in hiring, search processes, all of these things that are de facto prohibited by this new law. And so it was actually the Faculty Senate Special Committee on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging was the group that sent out this survey. And the survey said that it was going to be used to inform the ongoing effort of the Special Select Committee of the Faculty Senate to identify opportunities to align reapportionment or reappointment, promotion, and tenure processes to include work that advances the 7 bold goals. And specifically, we focus on faculty effort related to goal 4, which is advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, we were concerned, and apparently some faculty were also concerned about how you can align DEIB goals with tenure decisions without compelling faculty to make statements about their beliefs and affiliations, their ideals, and their principles. And so, there was faculty pushback, and the committee eventually they stopped their survey on May 10th. They paused the work of the committee to allow time for the committee and the faculty senate to understand more deeply the implications of the changes to the UNC system policy. And so I think this is evidence that slowly but surely the policy it's making its way into the places it needs to, including faculty work groups, in order to stop the use of compelled or mandatory DEI statements. All of that said, the policy is very narrowly conceived. It does not apply to anything other than compelled speech. And so there are a lot of DEI activities that are not addressed by this policy. And so I think you get trade-offs with these policies. There are some policies like the ones you see in Florida that are very broad and take in almost anything DEI related. And then you get this narrow policy. And with the narrow policy, obviously, there are a lot of other ways that DEI administrators can still pursue their goals without compelling speech. Some of those are fine, like doing outreach to underserved communities. Some of those are very, very suspect. It's clearly a way to get around the policy to still mandate or enshrine DEI on campus. And so I think that, these approaches require a lot of kind of discussion and consideration to figure out, what to do and which policies maybe to pair together to really make sure that campuses are not, forcing an ideology down the throats of faculty or students. The North Carolina legislature, in addition to the UNC Board of Governors, is taking this on. There is a bill that's being considered right now, Senate Bill 364. And that bill would both codify the prohibition on compelled speech, but also end DEI trainings, both at the UNC system institutions, community colleges, and for all state government employees. That bill has now been passed by both the House and the Senate and vetoed by Governor Cooper. And so now it is awaiting veto override. So I think North Carolina has been making, like I said, slow and steady progress on this issue, but there's still more to be done.
I'm glad that you mentioned the trainings, Jenna. In my experience in higher ed, those are some of the most poisonous activities that faculty participate in or are forced to participate in on campus. And we should be clear, they come with their own form of compelled speech. Not the same kind of compelled speech as a job application in which one is required to write a diversity statement, but compelled speech that I'll refer to as socially compelled. Let's all 10 years ago, this would have been, let's all circle up and check our privileges, right? Now it's gotten a little more sophisticated than that, but certainly these trainings are opportunities for faculty to be extorted, essentially, into saying what they may or may not believe about political ideologies and realities. And there are many ways, I think we can all imagine, our listeners can imagine, that there are many ways of punishing even a tenured faculty member short of firing him or her. And the DEI training is where one reveals one's true beliefs. If one is not towing the line and saying what one's antagonists want to hear. And so revealing oneself to be, for example, a conservative, or even to have a more old-fashioned understanding of the terms diversity and equity and inclusion, can really set one up for a terrible workplace environment from that moment forward. So I am all for the elimination of these trainings, to be sure.
Well, and I think these trainings, Graham, you just mentioned how it compels speech from students in a social manner. But if I recall correctly, a few years ago, NC State had released this training that at least they said was going to be required of all students. I don't know if it was actually enforced, but we had an intern here at the Martin Center at the time, and we actually took the training with her just to see what kinds of questions they were asking students. And there was at least one example where in this training, which they said was required in order to graduate, but in order to proceed and therefore complete the training, students had to click a correct answer on a DEI related question. I think it had to do with cultural appropriation of some sort. Where was it okay for Brad to wear a sombrero to the party? And you had to answer that no. It's not okay because he's being unkind and he's acculturating someone else's culture. So you had to click that. Now, is that a form of compelled speech? I mean, that's a hard question to really determine in a legal sense, but I think it's really pushing the line there.
Yeah, that's right. I used to have to complete a similar training every year that was Title IX based. And just like the scenario you're outlining, in order to advance, one had to affirm the most legalistic, progressive understanding of all the different areas of sexual relationships and consent covered by Title IX. I think there was even a question that asked whether the preponderance of the evidence standard was appropriate for campus tribunals. Which, I mean, that level of specificity is insanely political, right? And certainly in practice, if not in law, is a form of compelled speech.
Right. I think there's the other important thing to consider is that these trainings, they don't even work. I mean, in addition to the fact that they are clearly politicized and that they are compelling people to state things they don't believe or agree with things they don't believe, they also don't work. There's a growing amount of evidence, especially in the management literature, that trainings are divisive. They don't work in the workplace, and that includes college campuses.
But is the goal to, force people to undergo some sort of like humbling ritual in which they submit in order to continue their employment without having all kinds of things thrown at them? Or I think that in a lot of cases that is the real intent. Like, we know you're not going to step out of line. We know that you're not with us, but we know you're not going to step out of line. So, here's a biscuit for you.
Well, the stated goal is to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think we need to hold them to that and say, if it does not work on your very own metrics, then you need to stop doing it. Not only is it compelled speech and therefore illegal, according to the First Amendment, it is not working. You are failing. And therefore you need to stop.
Well, I guess what you would need then is like surveys of attitude changes, sort of, done anonymously so that people aren't afraid to say what they think. You would need some evidence that they are not working.
Right. I mean, there is evidence, generic evidence, and also specific evidence that is written in, these management journals that say DEI trainings do not work. Obviously, we don't have survey data from every single campus, but they're all using the same trainings. They're all talking right out of the same playbook. And so there's no reason to believe that, well, it doesn't work in corporate America. It doesn't work in business offices. It doesn't work at Harvard, but it's going to work at UNC. Like that boggles the mind.
I would direct our readers to a piece that we ran on the Martin Center's website in February by Scott Yenor. It's called "At Texas A&M, A Different Kind of Climate Change." And he talks about it and lays out quite inarguably how DEI efforts at Texas A&M have, by the wokesters' own measures, made campus climate worse. People feel like they belong less than they did previously. They don't feel that a new world of racial harmony has arrived on campus. And it's pretty damning stuff. Highly recommend that piece.
So kind of then what is needed is, I don't know what you would say, somebody to examine these things and get the ball rolling, to look at existing DEI policies and suggest places where they could be removed from the system, to review handbooks and so on, training materials, and push the issue to get them out. That is always one of the problems. We tend to get legislatures that say, well, here's a bill that solves everything, and it just dies on the implementation stage. Right. So there has to be something further to, get some sort of ombudsman or something to get this stuff out of there.
The Senate GovOps team has actually already started that work before they even drafted the bill. they submitted a request to the UNC system for a list of all the trainings that were going on across campuses and in various departments. They have apparently already gotten that information back. They have not released it to the public. So the Martin Center has filed a public records request with universities to also get that information, and that should be forthcoming.
That's good, because and it has to be ongoing, because the other guys are always working 24/7 to find workarounds and sneaky language and all kinds of little things where everything's done on the wink wink level.
Right. It's indoctrination whack-a-mole is what it feels like we're playing. But we'll keep it up.
Jen, I'm curious about other university-wide events such as orientation. Have they looked at possibly what materials are presented to freshmen?
So the GovOps request about training should include any training that happens at freshman orientation. But like I said, we have not gotten the results of that publicly available yet. But that was part of the request. And so we will see what is there. I think as you're right to point out that freshman orientation is often a place where the indoctrination is very present.
Okay, well, let's move on to Graham. Graham's got a hot topic here, I guess. I'm sure our friends in China and Russia are kind of thrilled about it. I don't know how about the rest of us, but go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, thank you. We have a recent piece on our website by J.A. Cawthon, who is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, former history teacher at the U.S. Naval Academy, and a retired naval officer. And he's written actually a series of articles on our website, the most recent being in June, earlier this month, on grievance-based curricula invading the military academies. So this most recent piece talks about the emergence of various diversity and inclusion courses of study at the military academies. He outlines how, among other things, how West Point's diversity inclusion course of study went from a mere bad idea in a 2017 memo to a full 15 credit hour minor in 2020. And he looks at a similar minor at the Air Force Academy established in 2021. Now, if you look at the prose surrounding the development of these programs, you see tiny little perfunctory nods to the main work of military academies, or what ought to be the main work of military academies. For example, the Air Force Academy says that its diversity and inclusion studies minor will create leaders who not only understand and recognize the importance of diversity, but who actively create inclusive environments that leverage this diversity toward mission success. The problem is that nobody actually believes that. And the proof of that is in the fact that in our war game simulations against China, we don't dock them points for lack of diversity. Somebody made that point in a National Review article last year. I wish I could find the piece. But it's just obvious that military academy curricula are being driven by something other than mission preparedness, and that is this insidious DEI ideology.
Yeah, so I actually took a look at the reading list at West Point, and I mean there are a number of readings that have to do with gender, with diversity, with bias, and racial oppression. But a few of the titles, which I think all were in bold, and I don't know if them being in bold meant that these are especially important or not. I couldn't figure that out. But we'll all recognize some of these titles that are on this reading list. The New Jim Crow, Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Case for Reparations. The list goes on. So, I mean, we know that the actual material they want military students to be reading is this highly, highly ideological, politicized content.
There's a retired colonel. He was like the hero of the last tank battle that was in the first Gulf War, Douglas McGregor. And he says anybody, and this is a problem because the leadership in the military it's gone. He says anybody above the first rank of general, they're a political person. They've made their way up the ranks mostly through politicizing, going with the flow, and you're not going to get any real leadership. I see things like back in 2017, the Air Force had a big, they had one of these graffiti hoaxes where a minority student wrote some stuff attacking himself for his race. And at the time, the superintendent of the Air Force said, regardless of the circumstances under which those words were written, they were written and that deserves to be addressed. In other words, it doesn't matter that they're false. We're still going to treat them as if they were true. And I think that's kind of the leadership of the military academies right now. They are all gung-ho on this stuff. And it's hard to see where the turnaround's going to come from. Now, on the other hand, I have a friend who works at Virginia Military Institute, and they just kind of bounced their diversity officer because there was a change in the governor of Virginia from Democrat to Republican. The Democrat had put in, Virginia Military Institute is a state school, and they had put in a bunch of hardcore diversity people under the Democrat administration, and under the new Republican administration, they kind of pushed the chief diversity officer out the window or something. So there is some chance for turnaround, but it's got to be political.
Well, there is an alumni group also at the Virginia Military Institute, and I think that's really helpful. As well as there are some other nonprofits that are tackling this issue, specifically in the military. There's STARS, which is Veterans Standing Against CRT Woke Ideology in the Military and Service Academies, and also the Center for Military Readiness, which promotes high standards and sound priorities for the military. And I think that it's essential that these groups continue to get their message out, because I think a lot of veterans don't know what's going on at these military academies. They don't know. They remember what it was like when they were there. It's just like any other institution. You get the rose-colored glasses and the nostalgia. You remember what it was like when you were at your own alma mater in 1980, 1990, 1960, and you remember it being great before all of these other priorities came in, before the meritocracy was totally destroyed, before there was an embargo on fun. And so you don't realize what's going on now. And so I think that there does need to be more work to let veterans know that the military academies have really changed so that veterans can get involved.
I'm just shocked that the academies themselves aren't realizing how they're shooting themselves in the foot. Do they really think that they're going to be better equipped to win wars by implementing these sort of policies? And, I was reading that article, Graham, you mentioned, and he reported that these academies were instituting kind of a tattletale type system, that if a cadet was punished for whatever the reason, and he just so happened to be a minority, he could, and the person punishing him was not, then he could report it, and it may materialize into something or it might not. But how is that going to affect training in these academies?
And the chain of command, which is, the fundamental fact of military discipline. It would seem to me, I'm not a military man myself, but it would seem to me that, if two nations are at war with one another and one of them can no longer trust or operate according to its chain of command, that could be harmful. That could be a disadvantage for us strategically.
Well, one of the things, point raised by Colonel McGregor, is that we, for the last who knows how long, pretty much since World War, or the Korean War maybe, we have been fighting much small. Our only military activity has been against much smaller, weaker nations that we can defeat in a week or so. We don't have the fighting mentality that we once did. We assume our guys are going to win, and so there's no focus on the fighting end. What there is a focus on social change. There are some countries that we might want to consider being strong, focusing on our fighting forces to deal with rather than assuming that we win, they lose. It doesn't matter who we have making the decisions or in the cockpit or whatever.
I've got to assume that it also hurts recruitment for these academies. If military academies are, no different than any other higher ed institution, promoting the same ideologies, promoting the same mindset, then they're not going to get really high quality recruits. I think that, someone who becomes a military officer, someone who enlists in the military, it is a special kind of person. They have to have, a really good work ethic, devotion to country, a set of skills and priorities that just are not the standard college student set of priorities. And if you fundamentally change military academies, you're not going to be able to recruit those people anymore. You might get a larger number of people, but I don't think they're going to be of the same caliber that you would otherwise.
And if they're being taught that the country that they're defending is systemically unjust, why would they even feel motivated?
Yeah, that's right. There's nothing in West Point's class, the politics of race, gender, and sexuality, that's going to make someone want to win a war or capable of winning a war. And so in that sense, I think what we're seeing is, DEI intrusion that matters. As a former member of an English department, I can say that it may matter one day that English departments have embraced DEI, but it's not a direct line between that embracing and societal collapse. Whereas we start getting DEI in the military academies and in the medical schools, now we actually have problems.
Okay, well, let's hope we don't have to fight today. Anyway, Shannon, you want to tell us what you've been working on lately?
Yes, Jay. As you mentioned, the Martin Center just released a new policy brief and model legislation on university governance and transparency. And that might sound, a little boring at first, but actually, if you think about it, public institutions are funded with taxpayer dollars, and the members who sit on these governing boards exist to serve the people of the state. And the people have a right to know how these institutions are being run and how their money is being used, and frankly, how they're educating their students that they're sending there. So you would presume that these boards, at least, well, we would hope that these institutions are really easy to observe their governing practices, but that's often not the case. It's not really easy to know how they're spending money and on what personnel decisions they're making, what curricular decisions they're making. It's not as easy as it should be for citizens to get in touch with board members and to voice their concerns or simply to ask questions. So there's definitely a need for improvement here. And so we outline a few pretty simple and honestly very easy ways that that this can be improved. First and foremost, governing boards should broadcast and record their meetings. And this was an improvement, honestly, during the coronavirus pandemic. As someone who was reporting on board affairs at the time, it honestly was helpful to have a live stream, not just because no one could go in person at the time, but because, other people have 9-to-5 jobs. They can't just drop whatever they're doing to attend in person a meeting. And prior to the pandemic, that was often the case. Like if you couldn't be there in person, then you wouldn't hear the discussion and what went into various policy decisions. And so broadcasting and recording, that means putting those recordings on an archive on a website that is easily accessible so that if you can't watch it as it's happening, you can go back and find it. So that's a very easy, concrete thing that boards can do. A few other recommendations we have is it should just be super, super simple to contact whatever board member you want to. So many of these institutions have a generic email address that we know you send an email to and no one reads. If you want to talk to a specific board member, put that online, their email, their university mailing address, very easy. Another point is the public should have plenty of notice of upcoming meetings and what roughly is going to be discussed during those meetings. At least here in North Carolina, it's very frequent that the public isn't notified of the exact schedule the board will be meeting until a few days prior. And that's just not enough for people to plan and think ahead. And another point that would be fairly easy to implement would be taking votes by roll call. And this was also a pandemic. This was a pandemic policy that a lot of institutions implemented by necessity, because a lot of meetings, well, all meetings were being conducted over Zoom, and it's very hard to hear the number of yays and nays over Zoom. So they said, you know what, we're just going to take everyone's name one at a time, yay or nay. And, you know, even though we're back to in-person meetings, this is still a very valuable way to keep track of really, okay, are you in favor of this policy or are you not? Because even being in the same room, you can't always know for sure who said yes and who said no. So again, very simple, and this should be recorded in the meeting minutes. And we have several other recommendations. I would just say one more is providing a time for public comment. Members of the public need to be able to come and say if they're concerned about something, and to have the ears of the full board. It's not enough just to have like a short period before a meeting, like at 8 a.m. with 2 board members who haven't had coffee yet. Like, they need to have the attention of the full board to be taken seriously. And they also need to know with plenty of time ahead of time when they have the opportunity to sign up, because just telling them a week before is not really conducive to being very transparent. And so anyway, so those are some of the reforms that we recommended.
Well, I know they would make my life a lot easier if they were implemented, trying to cover what is going on at the Board of Governors and various boards of trustees. I think the public comment one would be especially valuable. Right now, the UNC system Board of Governors public comment period, I think we've called it mysterious, is what it is. You go online and you just have to check back from time to time, and they will open the public comment period for the next meeting. But you never know exactly when that comment period is going to be open. You never know when it's going to be closed. And so you just have to keep checking back to have the opportunity to write this public comment, which goes into a black box on their website. And I've been told that it then goes to the board members' board books, which is where they get all of their information. And then they have the option to read the public comments. And so, I love our Board of Governors. They do a lot of good work, but this is one area where I think that they made this substitution during the pandemic. It used to be that you could do public comment in person, that you could sign up and you could speak and the full board would be there. But when the pandemic hit, they went online with the public comment period where you could submit your comments, and it hasn't been as good. I'm not sure that board members are actually reading the comments or being directed to the comments, and I'm sure that they're not having the impact that they otherwise would. And so I think that's a real opportunity for improvement there, and it's something I'm hopeful that they will change.
Well, wasn't one of the reasons I think that they kind of, at least at Chapel Hill, they kind of altered their public commenting, was because the radicals there were so dominating the public comment period that they were trying to turn the Board of Governors meetings into a sort of zoo event rather than
right. Well, I'm talking about this system rather than UNC Chapel Hill. And I agree that there often were problems with public comment. And I think that was an issue of rule enforcement rather than the having the public comment process itself. You can publicly comment on everything at the not the UNC, at the North Carolina General Assembly. You walk into the meeting, you sign up. It's very easy. And obviously a lot of the things the General Assembly do are quite controversial, but they still manage a very orderly comment process. They give everyone a limit of 2 minutes. They time you precisely. They call on you in order. And so I think it is possible to do an orderly, lawful public comment process that preserves that access for individuals to speak to the board.
Shannon, in your blueprint for reform, one of the schools that you single out for praise is East Carolina University. And I just want to say briefly to our listeners what that school does. I have here in front of me, linked to from your blueprint, a list of the 2022-2023 board members, names, what appear to be home addresses, what appear to be personal telephone numbers, and personal email addresses. And these, I should be very clear here, these email addresses are not like billtrustee@ecu.edu. These are like Hotmail addresses, right? Now, obviously, there's no system we can put in place that's going to make trustees check their emails and respond to emails in a timely pace. But just to have this information is so valuable and seems so easy and reasonable. And I would encourage all universities to follow this pattern.
Yeah, another thing that you didn't mention that I think that is in the blueprint, which is one of our recommendations, is the hiring of a board staff member.
Mm-hmm.
This is absolutely crucial, and this is an action to be taken by the legislator to mandate. I think that there's a voluntary permission to hire one, but there has to be a law demanding one be there, because that is the way you get past the very serious asymmetry of information problem in which because university administrators know everything that's going on and trustees are people who are part-timers and they're removed a bit from the school, so they don't quite know what's going on as much, and they can very easily be manipulated. If there is a board employee dedicated to the board who is at the policy analyst level, that goes a long way towards getting rid of this asymmetry of info problem.
Jay, yes, absolutely. And I just have to mention this event that happened a few years ago during a board meeting. And this is just a moment in my mind where they especially needed some other person apart from the system to help them analyze the data that they were looking at. They were being presented on a pilot program that changed the admissions at a certain number of schools. And they compared, all I really remember at this moment is that they compared the graduation rates of some of the lowest performing schools, which were horrendous. Like we're talking like in the 20%, like 20% graduation rates. And they're saying, look, these schools that we experimented with, basically have the same horrible graduation rates as these other schools. So that means everyone's doing great. And I just was like, how is the logic being, I just at that moment realized these board members need to have someone else to help them realize like there is another policy solution here, and it's to not imitate schools who are all doing horrible.
Yeah, another situation is when it comes to hiring chancellors. Board members get these huge packets of mostly sort of benign stuff that they often get it at the very last minute. And they're expected to make a decision on a chancellor hire based on this. No, they need somebody to really look into this person's ideas, backgrounds, their writing, their research, whatever, their past actions, and say, this is the person for the job, or there's a lot of red flags about this person. So yeah, there's a million and one ways that a board staff member would improve matters.
Another of our recommendations kind of ties into that, and that is the timely availability of materials, both for the public and for board members. If you give people 5 business days to read 600 pages of materials, it's impossible, or it's very, very difficult. And so, I mean, it's like Congress. Nobody has a chance to actually read the bills before they're passed. And I think the same thing is prone to happen at a board meeting if you give boards of governors or boards of trustees too little time to examine the materials. I think the materials should be made much, much earlier to both the public and the board, so there's adequate time for them to be vetted by board members and concerned members of the public and a staff member if that person is available. Right now, often it's too much information in too little time.
Yeah, and one thing in the blueprint, I kind of wish we'd been a little bit more explicit is where it says universities should provide orientation and ongoing training for board members. Once again, this is where a staff member comes in handy, because with when universities train board members, they don't train them to do their jobs at peak efficiency or whatever. They kind of say, they kind of try to keep the board members in the dark and to narrow their activities so that they can continue doing what they want. It's sort of like, don't worry your pretty little heads about all these big nasty decisions, and we'll take care of that. So the board should conduct the training, not the university administration, because they totally exploit it to their own advantage.
I think you're right about that. Trainings are often counterproductive.
Anyway, I guess that's about where we're going to stop here. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please like, follow, share, rate, subscribe, or even say something nice about us in the comments. And if you want the full range of Martin Center content, please visit our website at www.jamesgmartin.center. Thanks again.